The first word my daughter offered to a stranger at 30,000 feet wasn't hello, it was angel, a breath more than a sound, slipped across the prongs of a plastic fork as a flight attendant lifted one careful bite to Harper's mouth. 13 hours of silence had trailed us through security, along the jet bridge, and into the soft hush of first class. And then this woman with steady hands and unhurried eyes coaxed a syllable from where grief had sealed everything shut. A billionaire single-father wit. A billionaire single-father wit. Alina didn't perform kindness. She practiced it the way a good pilot practices landings. Precise, ordinary, patient. She crouched to Harper's level like the aisle itself belonged to the child, peeled back the foil on a meal that had been refused twice already, and made the fork look less like a tool and more like permission. I had no language for the way my chest tightened when Harper leaned forward minutely and took the bite. I only knew that the sound of her swallowing was the loudest thing I had heard in months. Angel, Harper whispered, and the word stunned me with its accuracy. Not because Alina was anything divine, but because the miracle was so ordinary it bordered on impossible. Someone cared without asking my daughter to do the work of being easy. By the time the cabin lights dimmed, Harper's cheek had found my sleeve, her stuffed bunny pinned beneath her chin like a sentry. The laptop I kept opening for refuge, deals, projections, the scaffolding of control, stayed closed, the hinge oddly heavy. Outside our small pool of light, a baby cried. Ice chimed in a glass. A man argued softly with his spreadsheet. When Alina passed, she set a small tiger-printed juice at the corner of the tray and smoothed the blanket as if smoothing mattered. After landing, we queued behind the practiced choreography of carry-ons and courtesy. I should have followed the stream toward customs and the car my office had sent. Instead, I told Harper to wait by a window where the runway flashed like a metronome and went back. I didn't have a plan ready. Money solves many things. It doesn't teach you how to speak when gratitude has made your tongue slow. Alina was angling toward the crew exit with her suitcase obedient at her heel. I said her name and she turned, expression neutral, a boundary set without being announced. Thank you, I managed. You're welcome, she said, and the words landed like clean linen. Her eyes went past me, tracking the small figure at the window with the bunny pressed to its sternum. She did the hard part. I almost said no, that I'd done the hard part alone for 2 years and failed at most of it. But the impulse tasted like pride. What I said was, you showed up without asking her to move. The sentence surprised us both. She didn't reply. And maybe this is the moment when a different life begins. When you hear yourself say a truer thing than you meant to. I'm in Tokyo for 2 weeks, I said. I brought her because I thought a change might help. I didn't plan on... I gestured toward the gate, the jet, the ache. On this. Alina's mouth softened, not into a smile, into a tension. She had the kind of face that listens. I'd like to pay you to spend time with her, I said, and the words rang wrong until I adjusted them. Not a job, familiarity, safety, just be around, for a few days. You don't know me, she said, and there was no defensiveness in it, only an accounting. I know what I saw, I answered, and I did. A small fork, a steady hand, the curve of my daughter's throat as she remembered hunger. She glanced back at the runway, where a plane nosed toward light like it could choose its weather. 3 days, she said at last. 3 days, I echoed, not trusting myself to push for more. Tokyo met us with rain that blurred the edges of everything into watercolor. The hotel suite looked like a catalog had walked in and put its hands on its hips. Marble, chrome, a couch that expected posture. I said I'd ordered dinner. Alina nodded and crossed to Harper without asking permission of the air. I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye before, she offered softly. Harper didn't answer. She reached for Alina's fingers and held for exactly 2 seconds, the longest contact I'd seen with anyone not named clinician. We ate noodles and made no ceremony of it. One of the evening's small mercies, Alina didn't speak in strategies. She narrated the obvious. This bite is a moon, that noodle is sneaky, and left space around every sentence so a child could live inside it. Harper ate, not much, but with less negotiation than I'd come to expect. When toothpaste foamed later and the storybook opened, I stood in the doorway and watched without saying that in our recent life, bedtime meant bargaining. Harper asked for a second story, the rarest currency. Alina read it in a voice pitched for one small listener and one father pretending he hadn't been listening all along. When Harper slept, we let the city pour its neon through the glass. Alina accepted tea. I held coffee the way a man holds the last excuse he can't justify. We were quiet until quiet turned into a conversation. "Why me?" she asked at last, as if she needed to make sure I hadn't mistaken a miracle for a plan. "Because you didn't treat her like a case," I said, "or me like a wallet." I could have listed the specialists I'd hired, the progress charts, the checklists I'd love because they always love you back. I didn't. "You sat on the floor," I added, "and you kept watch." She looked through the rain as if it were a familiar room. "My grandmother used to do that," she said after a moment. "Keep watch, soup on the stove, a light in the hall. When you're small, you don't need solutions. You need someone at the door." I thought of all the doors I'd closed to keep the cold out and realized I'd kept us in. "I'm not good with soft things," I confessed, surprised by how easily the admission left me. "You can learn," she said, which somehow sounded less like comfort and more like homework. The next morning began with pancakes and no cheering. Harper chose honey over syrup with the solemnity of a judge and ate in a circle of attention that didn't ask her to perform being okay. We took the elevator down to the hotel's pocket garden, where koi shouldered each other in a shallow pond. "That one's a lantern," Alina told Harper, pointing to a bright fish. "He lights the water for the others." Harper's mouth moved, counting maybe, or making a secret pact with the brave. Back upstairs, crayons mapped a paper river and a blue bird who would find its flock again if the sky cooperated. Harper slid the paper toward me and held out a crayon. I realized with a stupid rush of embarrassment that I hadn't drawn anything that wasn't a diagram in years. I made a crooked line. "River," I said. She traced over it, firming the waver into certainty, and for a second I understood why people framed children's drawings like deeds. It was after lunch, and just before the day folded, that Harper touched the corner of a photograph she kept tucked beneath her pillow. Her mother, Claire, luminous and tired, holding a newborn who didn't yet know what a world is. "Daddy doesn't say her name," Harper whispered, not accusing, just memorizing the map out loud. I felt the old ice groan beneath me and stepped anyway. "Claire," I said. The room didn't collapse. The ceiling didn't lower. Harper nodded as if we'd put a lighthouse back on a coast. That night, when the rain turned from curtain to mist, I watched my daughter sleep and let the discomfort of hope find a chair. If a woman with a napkin and a steady fork could move us this far, perhaps soft was only a skill I had refused to practice. At the threshold of the guest room, I told Alina, "Thank you," and the phrase felt less transactional than it ever had in my mouth. It felt like the beginning of a language I'd avoided because it didn't scale. 3 days, she reminded me with no edge. 3 days, I agreed. But the shape of the agreement had changed. It no longer sounded like a limit. It sounded like a runway. Morning would come again with batter and small choices and the delicate luck of a day without alarms. I didn't know yet that Alina would run before the end of our 3 days, or that we would learn to chase without cornering, or that a drawing lettered in a child's hard-pressed hand would pin itself to our fridge and hold the house together. I only knew the truth I'd seen from seat 2B when a stranger met my child where she was. Sometimes landing is the bravest part of flying. Tokyo wore its mourning like silk, pale, clean, deliberate. Rain had rinsed the city overnight, and the streets below the hotel window shone with early traffic, everything in motion except the small figure at the breakfast table. Harper sat cross-legged on her chair, a napkin tucked in the collar of her pajamas, face solemn as she studied the steam rising from her pancakes. Across from her, Alina poured tea into 2 cups, one for herself, one for Elliot, though she hadn't asked if he wanted any. "She likes the edges a little crispy," she said without looking up. "I burned the first batch." Elliot blinked. He hadn't expected anyone in his life to sound so casual in the presence of error. "They're perfect," he said, and meant it. Harper poked the pancake with her fork, then glanced toward Alina for permission. Alina nodded once. The girl took a bite, slow and thoughtful, chewing as if rediscovering the texture of trust. Good? Alina asked. Harper nodded. Not a word, but close. Elliot sat back and tried to memorize the moment. The faint scrape of a fork, the smell of butter, the light catching Alina's wrist as she lifted her tea. It had been 2 days since they landed, and in that time, the air between the three of them had shifted from polite experiment to something unnameably tender. They walked after breakfast. The drizzle had eased into a soft mist, and Alina insisted on finding a garden with room to breathe. She guided Harper through narrow streets that smelled of rain and coffee, the child's hand fitting neatly into hers. Elliot trailed behind, carrying Harper's bunny in the crook of his arm like a diplomat unsure of protocol. The hotel garden was quiet, a koi pond framed by maple leaves, a path slick with water and patience. Harper crouched by the edge, counting orange shapes beneath the surface. That one looks like a lantern, Alina said. He's lighting the way for the others. Harper smiled at the fish, lips curving without sound. Elliot saw it, the first true smile since Claire's funeral, and felt something in his chest loosen. They sat on a bench under the maple tree. Alina leaned forward, elbows on her knees. You said you wanted her to talk again, she murmured, but talking's the last step, not the first. She has to feel safe enough to make noise. He nodded, eyes on his daughter. I've given her everything safety could buy. That's the problem, Alina said softly. You can't buy presents. You have to practice it. The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. He'd spent months outsourcing parenthood, therapists, tutors, nannies with advanced degrees, and carefully laminated strategies. None had managed what Alina did by simply sitting in the same quiet space as Harper. They lingered until the mist turned to rain again. Back inside, Harper drew while Alina made tea. Elliot hovered, unsure whether to join or observe. What's that? Alina asked, leaning over the table. Harper held up her drawing. A tall figure, stick limbs, messy hair, standing beside a smaller one with long curls. Between them, a third, shorter figure with a bright yellow circle hovering above its head. She's an angel, Harper said. The sound startled all three of them. Her voice was small, rough with disuse, but it was a voice. Alina froze. Elliot's breath caught. Who's the angel, sweetheart? Alina asked gently. Harper pointed at the yellow circle. Her. Elliot swallowed. Is she flying away? Harper shook her head. She stays. Tears pricked behind his eyes before he could stop them. He hadn't heard her string a full sentence together since Claire's accident. Now in the middle of a Tokyo afternoon, she'd given him proof of hope, and it had Alina's shape. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer on the glass, and thought about how stillness had replaced survival. Alina was asleep in the guest room. Harper was breathing softly in her bed, one arm around her bunny. For the first time in years, Elliot didn't feel alone in the silence. The next morning, Alina found him at the table with his laptop closed. No work today? I canceled my meetings, he said. They'll live without me. She raised an eyebrow. You sure you can live without them? He smiled faintly. I'm learning. They took Harper to a small bookstore tucked between two cafes. The walls were lined with children's books in Japanese and English, their covers bright with animals and impossible skies. Harper chose one with a bird on the front, blue feathers and a single gold eye. This one, she said. Elliot bought it without hesitation. On the walk back, Harper held the book against her chest as though it might flutter away. That evening, Alina read aloud from the first page. The bird had lost its flock in a storm and couldn't find its way home. But he keeps flying, Alina read, because the sky is too big to stay lost forever. When she looked up, Harper was leaning against her shoulder, eyes half closed. Elliot sat in the doorway, arms crossed, memorizing every sound. Later, when Harper slept, Alina stayed in the lounge with the lights low. She folded her hands around her mug and said, You should know, I didn't take this job for the money. I didn't think you did, he said. I lost someone too, she continued. My grandmother, she raised me. When she died, I kept trying to fill the quiet with work. Flights, shifts, anything to keep moving. But eventually I realized the only way out of grief is through stillness. She glanced at him. I see that same noise in you. He looked at his hands. Claire died 2 years ago. A car accident on her way to meet us for dinner. I told Harper her mom would be late. His voice cracked. She's still waiting, in her way. Alina didn't speak. She didn't offer platitudes or sympathy. She simply reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was light, professional almost, but it anchored him better than any therapy session had. 3 days, she said quietly, echoing their original agreement. Yes. We've used 2. He nodded. 1 left. Maybe we don't measure it in days, she said. Maybe in small miracles. When morning came, Harper woke first. She padded into the kitchen, dragging her bunny by one ear, and climbed onto a stool. Can I make pancakes? And she asked. Alina grinned. You can help. Elliot joined them midway through, hair tousled, tie abandoned. Harper stirred batter with grave concentration, flour dusting her nose. Daddy, look, she said. I'm making circles. You are, he said, and kissed the top of her head. The word daddy hit him like sunlight after a storm. Ordinary, warm, impossible to forget. They ate together. No therapist, no agenda, just pancakes and laughter, and the slow, careful rebuilding of something that might be called peace. When Alina left that afternoon to run an errand, Harper drew another picture. This time, 3 figures stood under a blue sky, holding hands. Above them, in crooked letters, she wrote, "We can fly now." Elliot stared at it long after she'd gone to bed. The drawing wasn't perfect. Nothing in their lives was. But it was whole. He didn't see the message Alina had left until he walked into the kitchen the next morning. Her note lay beneath a coffee mug, folded once. You don't need wings to fly, Elliot. Just the courage to stay on the ground. She was gone before sunrise. He found the note under an overturned mug, the handle pointing toward the door like a compass gone stubborn. You don't need wings to fly, Elliot. Just the courage to stay on the ground. For a long minute, the words rearranged the kitchen into something narrower. The skillet waiting for pancakes looked like a prop from someone else's morning. Harper patted in, Bunny by the ear, and climbed onto her stool without speaking. He made batter anyway, because ritual had become their borrowed backbone. But his hands were clumsy and the first pancake tore when it hit the plate. Crispy, Harper murmured, almost to herself. Crispy, he echoed, and set the broken circle in front of her, like proof that imperfect things could still be offered. They ate in the quiet that follows a small emergency. Harper swung her feet and watched the doorway with a child's unwavering patience. Elliot forced his phone face down on the counter. If Alina had really left, he would not find the answer in the part of the world that glowed. By late morning, the city had brightened into watercolor. He took Harper to the garden because that was what they did when they didn't know what else to do. The koi rose like coins tossed by the weather. Harper counted to 8, skipped 9, and reached 10 with a whisper. Lantern, she said, pointing to the boldest fish. Lighting the way, Elliot finished, surprised by the small relief of remembering their private mythology. He wanted to tell her that sometimes the brave one circles back for the others, and sometimes the brave one is simply the one who stays. They returned to the suite with damp sleeves and a second silence, the kind that expects a sound. Alina opened the door with her key and stepped inside carrying a paper bag. No uniform, no suitcase. Her hair was pinned up in a way that made her look younger, which he distrusted as an illusion and loved on sight. You left a note, he said, unable to braid gentleness into the sentence. I did. She set the bag on the counter. And I came back. Harper slid off her stool with the solemn speed of someone protecting hope. She didn't run. She took 3 steps and stopped in front of Alina. Small chin tilted like a question. Alina crouched. I needed air, she said. I went to a temple this morning. I lit incense for someone I miss. She glanced at Elliot and then back to Harper. It made the world quieter. I wanted to bring some of that quiet home. What's in the bag? Harper asked, in the soft, careful voice of a child practicing commerce with the future. Bread that smells like a warm cloud, Alina said, and a book I found. She pulled out a slim volume with a pale blue cover. You Are My Sunshine illustrated, the title printed in English and Japanese. Elliot felt something in his chest tip. The world filled the room at the edges again. They read on the floor because chairs felt too formal. Harper lay on her stomach with her chin propped in both hands. Alina sat cross-legged, the book open across her knees. Elliot took the unruly corner that kept folding up and smoothed it flat. The pictures were simple. Children in yellow raincoats, a paper sun strung on the string, a window with a plant that wanted the sky. Alina hummed the melody once, checking the fit, and Harper's mouth lifted like recognition arriving. She hummed back, a note behind, then a note with, then the same note steady. When the song ended, Harper pushed herself up and reached for the paper bag again. She pulled out a smaller package wrapped in tissue. 3 stubby crayons, blue gold, and a pink so bright it felt like a dare. She unwrapped them ceremonially and drew a bird, a sun, 3 small triangles at the bottom. She added tails to 2 of the triangles as if they were kites and connected them with a line. "We're tied," she said. "We are," Alina agreed. Her voice didn't shake, but something behind it did. Lunch was bread and fruit and a slice of silence that wasn't empty. After, Harper napped with the book under her arm like a passport. Elliot and Alina moved to the balcony because that was where the truth seemed to find them. The city was all glass and muscle. The rain had scrubbed it clean of yesterday's mistakes. "You were right to be scared," he said. "When I saw the note, I thought—" He stopped. He'd spent a year stopping at the edges of the real sentences, and he was tired of surviving his own edits. "I thought we were back to leaving." "I am good at leaving," Alina said matter-of-factly. "It kept me safe." She turned her cup between her hands, considering whether to unspool the history she rarely offered. "When I was 9, I learned how to disappear without moving. I'd sit in the laundry closet and listen to the house decide what kind of night it wanted to be. My mother brought home men who didn't see children. One did. My grandmother took me the next day. 'We will be boring,' she said. 'Boring saves lives.' She cut my hair and made soup and left a nightlight on because doors slam less loudly in rooms that are already lit." Alina smiled, not softly. "I studied child development later because it felt like a map back to that house. Then my grandmother got sick. I quit school to keep watch. When she died, I couldn't make the house stay. So I learned to fly. I told myself altitude was safer than belonging." Elliot stared at the strip of sky above the skyline. "I told myself busyness was safer than grief," he said. "Claire died on a Tuesday. I sent an email about Q4 projections on Wednesday and called it coping." "And now?" Alina asked. He looked toward the guest room where a child slept with her hand on a book that remembered a song. "Now I want to be boring," he said. "Terribly, heroically boring." Alina huffed out a laugh that sounded like agreement wearing armor. "Boring is hard work." He reached for the truth that had been scraping like a hinge. "I didn't say her name," he admitted. "Claire." The ice was thin, and I didn't trust it to hold. "Has it?" Alina asked. He nodded once, as if confessing to a small, brave crime. "Earlier, in the garden, I said it. Nothing broke." Harper nodded, like I'd turned on a lighthouse. "I think she's been waiting for me to risk it." "Kids don't need us to be okay," Alina said. "They need us to be true." She didn't look at him when she said it. She looked at the city like she was negotiating with the idea of staying somewhere long enough to call it a view. Harper woke with the fragile fierceness of children who return from sleep, ready to renegotiate reality. She patted out, cheeks stamped with the quilt, hair making small arguments with gravity. "Again," she said, holding up the book. They sang softly, Alina carrying the melody, Harper catching it on the turns, Elliot backing them with a low hum until courage grew words. On the second pass, Harper leaned into Alina's shoulder and whispered, "Mommy liked this." The word didn't rip the room. It stitched. "Mine did too," Alina said without theatrics. "She sang it while she burned soup." Harper considered this alliance. 2 women who would never meet, sharing a chorus, then nodded, satisfied new math existed where old subtraction had lived. When the song ended, Harper went to her backpack and pulled out a folded photograph. Edges white from love, center soft from being touched. "Claire," Elliot said before Harper had to. The syllable felt less like ice and more like clear water. He held the picture with both hands because that's how you hold a bridge. "Flowers," Harper said, pointing to Claire's hair. "Pink and loud." "Peonies," he answered, and felt the exact shape of the memory slide back into its groove. "Lemon," Harper added, and nobody knew what she meant until she reached into the paper bag and produced a small lemon Alina had bought at a corner market because the son had been shy today. Harper set it on the table between the photograph and the book like an offering, like a dot connecting a line to its purpose. They made dinner together because boredom needed practice. Cutting vegetables, stirring a sauce that insisted on being watched, negotiating where the spoons lived. Elliot ruined a pan and didn't apologize to it. Harper declared the noodles too slippery and ate them anyway, then laughed when one jumped ship to her lap. The laugh hit the ceiling and came back warmer. After dishes, after bath, after the second glass of water and the check for monsters, Harper asked for a story that wasn't in a book. "Tell me about when I was born," she said. And Elliot realized he had been stockpiling that story like money, waiting for a year that never came. He told it now, badly at first, then with the care of a man recovering a language. The hospital. The way Claire's voice sounded like someone had finally tuned the room. How tiny Harper was and how big. How the nurse had folded the blanket like origami, and he'd been too scared to touch something so precisely made. When he finished, Harper yawned and rolled the bunny to face the wall, as if granting it privacy. "Again tomorrow," she said. Not a plea, a plan. They slipped back to the balcony when the house exhaled. Tokyo blinked. The rain was gone, the neon calmer, as if the city too had decided to practice staying. Alina rested her forearms on the railing. 3 days, she said, because contracts mattered even when the heart tried to write its own. "I know," he answered. He looked at her and didn't reach because reaching felt like naming something he wasn't entitled to yet. "Thank you for coming back." She tilted her head. "Thank you for staying." They stood in a silence that didn't require rescue. Somewhere above them, a plane stitched a white thread across the dark, an old habit passing overhead without insisting on being followed. Inside, a lemon glowed on a table like a small, ordinary sun. On the nightstand, a photograph held 4 people now, if you counted the space between the living and the memory. Tomorrow would bring weather and errands and a child's demands unsoftened by grief. Tonight, the ghosts that had ridden the flight with them settled into chairs and learned new names. The 4th morning arrived with sunlight sharp enough to expose what had been left unsaid. Tokyo no longer felt like a foreign city. It felt like a place caught between arrival and departure. A waiting room disguised as paradise. Elliot woke before dawn. He stood at the window while Harper slept, tracing the thin vapor lines left by early flights rising into the horizon. He wondered which one Alina might have been on if she hadn't chosen to stay. That thought was equal parts comfort and warning. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Harper, her hair a small constellation of tangles, climbed onto the couch and pulled her knees to her chest. "She's still here, right?" she asked without preamble. He turned. "She's here." Harper nodded and went back to watching the sky, satisfied with that single data point. For a child who'd learned early that people could disappear without noise, presence had become her native language. By breakfast, Alina was already dressed, hair damp from the shower, a linen shirt rolled to her elbows. She looked like someone preparing to leave again, but she didn't. Instead, she set a plate of sliced fruit on the table and said, "We should take her somewhere new today, somewhere not indoors, somewhere with sky," Harper added quietly. Elliot smiled. "Sky it is." They ended up at Shinjuku Gyoen, a park broad enough to make the city forget its name. The cherry trees were in hesitant bloom, pink edges testing the air. Harper walked between them, a hand in each adult's, the 3 of them forming a small, uneven rhythm that somehow worked. At a pond's edge, she crouched and whispered to the fish, as if they might whisper back. Alina sat beside her. "Careful," she said. "They'll think your fingers are worms." Harper laughed, a bright, quick sound that startled the nearby ducks into flight. Elliot froze. The sound rolled through him like a forgotten chord struck clean. He wanted to thank Alina, but gratitude felt too small, too fragile to touch what was happening between his daughter and the world. They picnicked beneath a low tree. Harper ate strawberries one at a time, deliberate as a scientist. "Do you miss flying?" Elliot asked. Alina leaned back against the tree. "Sometimes it's easy to mistake altitude for freedom, but you don't see much from up there, just patterns. Down here you see faces." "And?" he asked. "And faces are heavier," she said, "but they stay with you." He didn't respond. He just watched Harper run toward a line of tulips, the wind turning her dress into a small flag. That night, Alina lingered at the balcony again, but this time she didn't stay in the shadows. "She's healing faster than I expected," she said. "You are too." Elliot let out a small laugh. "I'm not sure I'd call this healed. I'm terrified half the time, of saying the wrong thing, of losing this. This?" He gestured vaguely, to the room, to her, to Harper asleep behind the door. "Everything that doesn't hurt as much as it used to." Alina took a breath. "Then maybe the pain's just changing shape. That's what healing is." He looked at her, really looked. "You talk like someone who's done it before." She hesitated, then met his eyes. "When my grandmother died, I packed my bags the next morning. I didn't even clean her room. I just left. I thought if I kept moving, the grief wouldn't catch me. But it always does. It just changes airports." He smiled, sad and real. "And now?" "Now," she said, "I'm learning to land." Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance exactly, but its distant cousin, recognition, the kind that builds slowly, like trust. The next morning, Harper refused breakfast. She sat cross-legged on the floor, crayons spread around her like a ceremony. "Drawing?" Alina asked. Harper nodded. "A secret." "Can we see it when it's done?" Elliot asked. "Maybe," she said, the word drawn out like elastic. Hours later, while Harper napped, Alina and Elliot stepped into the hotel corridor to breathe. A maid pushed her cart past, humming an old Japanese tune. It felt too domestic, too normal for the fragile bubble they'd built. "She's getting stronger," Alina said. "But when we go back—" Elliot interrupted, gentle but certain. "If we go back—" Alina turned. "You mean you'd stay here?" "I mean, maybe it's not about where. Maybe it's about who's there." Her expression softened, but her voice stayed practical. "Elliot, I'm not part of your life. Not really. I was supposed to be 3 days." "3 days," he repeated, "and yet you're still here." "That's the danger of empathy," she said, half smiling. "It overstays." He wanted to reach for her hand, but before he could, Harper appeared in the doorway, holding up a piece of paper. "It's done." They followed her back inside. On the drawing were 3 figures under a large yellow sun. But there was something new, a 4th figure, faint, drawn in gray pencil behind them. "Who's that?" Alina asked softly. "Mommy," Harper said. "She's not gone. She just walks behind now." Elliot's throat tightened. Alina crouched next to Harper. "That's a beautiful way to remember her," she whispered. Harper nodded, satisfied, and ran off to tuck the picture into her suitcase. For a long moment, neither adult spoke. Then Elliot said, "She's seeing what I couldn't." Alina turned toward the window. "Children do. They believe in distance and closeness at the same time." He stepped beside her, voice low. "What do you believe in, Alina?" She hesitated. "I believe some people are meant to arrive on flights we never booked." He smiled faintly. "And some are meant to stay." The rest of the evening was quiet. Music from the city, the faint buzz of lights, the rhythm of someone washing a dish that didn't really need washing. Harper slept early, one arm around her bunny, the other resting on the drawing like a promise. Alina stood by the door with her small suitcase. "My schedule's open-ended," she said. "They grounded me for another week. Technical maintenance." "Lucky us," Elliot said. "Or unlucky plane," she replied. They both laughed softly. The air between them was lighter now, the tension less sharp, like 2 instruments slowly tuning toward the same key. "Stay," he said. And the word wasn't an order. It was a plea wrapped in gratitude. "I wasn't planning to leave," she admitted. When she smiled, it was different this time. Unguarded, a hint of the sky she'd carried down to earth. That night, Elliot found himself unable to sleep again. He wandered to Harper's door and listened to her breathing, steady, certain. Then he looked toward the balcony, where Alina stood barefoot in the glow of the city. Her eyes closed as if listening to a silent departure she no longer needed to take. The future still terrified him, but for the first time, it wasn't because of what might vanish, it was because of what might finally stay. San Francisco came up under the wing like a field of scattered stars, the bay a dark sleeve stitched with light. Harper pressed her palm to the window, as if she could cup a neighborhood, and fell asleep before the wheels kissed the runway. Alina didn't sleep. She watched the runway lamps stream past the window and felt the old urge to leave rise up and pass like turbulence. Noticeable, then gone. The house waited at the top of a hill, more glass than wall, the kind of architecture that made you think of statements, not soup. Elliot opened the door to that curated quiet, white stone, calm art, a kitchen so immaculate it looked untouchable. The alarm chirped in a pleasant voice, and then the place reminded them it had never learned to hold noise. Harper yawned, Bunny sideways under her arm. "Is this home?" she asked, the question flat with fatigue and heavy with jurisdiction. "It is," Elliot said, kneeling so they could occupy the same air. "If we make it." Alina set her carry-on by the island, scanning the rooms the way a nurse scans a chart. "We'll teach it," she said, almost to the house. She moved like a person who understood that belonging is an arrangement, not a miracle. They did not try to conquer it that night. Elliot ordered takeout that arrived in brown cartons, too sleek to stain. Alina found a small lamp in a guest room and clicked it on at the kitchen island, an amber circle against a sea of cool light. Harper ate noodles on a stool with her backpack still on, as if the straps could keep her tethered to the good hours behind them. Elliot reached for his laptop from muscle memory and then stopped. He closed the lid like a ceremony and placed it on top of the refrigerator, where it could not breathe on them. Morning made everything honest. The glass let the day in without filter. Elliot ruined the first pancake, and Harper ate it anyway on principle. Alina accepted hers with a grin that told the house mistakes would be tolerated from now on. Then she made a small claim. She dragged an armchair from the library to the corner near the window, laid a throw blanket over the carpet, and put a plant there. A philodendron with leaves like hands. A basket swallowed books. Crayons stood in a glass jar like bright missiles ready to be repurposed. She stuck a single note to the refrigerator at Harper's eye level. Pancakes. Walk. Story. Quiet. She left the times blank so the day could breathe. "Whose corner is this?" Harper asked, standing on the blanket's edge as if testing the temperature. "Yours," Alina said. "And anyone you invite." Harper set Bunny on the chair and nodded once, as if swearing in a small official. The lemon from Tokyo rode home in Elliot's coat pocket, more talisman than fruit. He set it on the counter. "We should plant a real tree," he said, surprised to hear the want in his own voice. "Back garden," Alina said. "Another anchor." The garden was a rectangle that had been told what to be. Hedges trimmed square, grass cut to the brochure, a view of the bay that made you feel rich unless you were lonely. In the far corner, a vendor's lemon sapling waited beside a hole Elliot had convinced someone to dig before they landed. They planted it together, Harper patting soil, Alina steadying the trunk, Elliot holding the stake, and, for once, not trying to do it all alone. "Roots," Harper whispered, like a spell. The small tree listed, then settled. They stood back and watched something ordinary promise to happen slowly. Later, Alina and Harper explored a neighborhood bookstore that smelled of paper and coffee. The clerk recognized Alina from nowhere, and everyone, offered a smile without curiosity, and showed Harper a children's shelf with a carpet shaped like a lake. Harper selected a book about a fox and a moon, then another about a kitchen that never slept. "We'll start a shelf," Alina said, opening a new list on her phone and naming it simply Home. Elliot went downtown for 2 hours and 8 minutes, returned with a look that said he had met numbers shaped like storms, and sat on the floor beside the new corner as if returning to the right altitude. Harper patted the space on the blanket next to her. He took it without negotiating. They drew a crooked kitchen with smoke on purpose and a window that looked like a sky. Evenings grew procedural in the best way. Dinner by the window, the city carrying on for them while they did not need to. Dishes stacked in the sink not as rebellion, but as proof that something had happened. Bath, the 3-brush ritual Alina had invented. 1, 2, 3, pause. "Does that feel okay?" A question that trained the room to ask consent as a reflex. Stories came from the fox and the bird in the kitchen. Stories also came from Elliot's memory. Flatter at first, then warming as he practiced letting the past be present without panic. Work pressed as it will. Meetings multiplied like a weed after rain. A board member became an emergency in a suit. Elliot pulled evening calls to 6:45, then to 7:10, then to the part of night that turns a kitchen into a missed opportunity. He took one on the balcony with the slider half open and returned with apology in his posture. Harper watched him the way a sparrow watches a cat. Evaluate, file, adjust. "We're not a vacation you visit between crises," Alina said later, elbows on the island, her voice even. "I don't need speeches. I need your calendars to agree with your mouth." He bristled, then breathed. "I am trying," he said, and it was true. Trying is different from choosing. He knew it. She knew it. The house was learning it. The next morning his phone lit up at 7:10 with a name that had once owned his attention. He watched it ring through while the butter obliged the pan. He did not answer. Harper looked up, caught the arc of the decision, and announced, "Circles," as if reporting weather. They ate the first pancake under the table on a blanket just because Harper decided the chairs were too tall today. Syrup stained the mat. It stayed. A little matte circle on marble the decorators would have hated began his campaign to make the kitchen real. Alina signed Harper up for a music class at a community center that smelled like mop water and birthdays. Harper hovered at the door until the teacher tapped a beat on a drum. Then she lifted a triangle and found the downbeat like intuition. On the drive home, she hummed something that wasn't quite "You Are My Sunshine" and wasn't quite anything else either. "You're writing one," Alina said. Harper's eyes flicked to the window and back. She didn't deny it. A neighbor waved from a driveway, asked a question with teeth wrapped in politeness. "So, are you family?" And Alina let the pause answer. Sometimes the truest thing is the one you don't rush. There were bad minutes. Harper refused dinner one night, garlic noodles judged by a tribunal she did not have to convene. Elliot's old reflex, bargain, fix, persuade, raised its head. Alina offered two choices instead, floor picnic or window picnic. Harper chose window and ate 3 noodles more than none. "Victory," Elliot said dryly. "Progress," Alina corrected, grinning. "Victories ask for parades. Progress wants pajamas." The plant in the corner noticed when no one watered it for a day and sulked. Elliot watched the leaves angle and set an alarm labeled, "Water something living." At 6:15, another alarm reminded him to turn the world down. At 6:22 one evening, he stepped through the door and said to no one in particular, "I'm early," like a child showing a good grade. Harper held up the Fox book as if it were a warrant and negotiated 2 chapters. He agreed and ignored everything that glowed. After Harper slept, Bunny faced toward the wall for privacy, one hand on the blue bird book as if it were a pilot's license. Elliot and Alina stood on the patio, looking at the lemon sapling. Fog unrolled itself over the bay. The bridge blinked its patient Morse. "It's still a lot of glass," Alina said of the house. "Helps with the landing," he said, and realized he meant it. Her suitcase remained in the guest room closet, handle reachable. Some evenings she touched it the way you touch a future you don't trust, then let go. "I don't know how long I'm here," she said once, not quite asking, not quite confessing. "Keys," he said, and placed one on the counter, next to the lemon from Tokyo that had dried to something like a folktale. "They're for practice, too." She stared at the key as if it were a wing or a door or both. "Doors slam," she said. "Then we hold them open with boring things," he answered. "Grocery lists, music class, pancakes that burn on the wrong side." She laughed and slid the key toward herself, but didn't pocket it. "We'll see." On a Tuesday, a quiet crisis threatened to become loud. Elliot's assistant texted double exclamation points. The board chair called during dinner. His thumb hovered over accept. The alarm on the fridge, 6:15, turned down the world, winked with ridiculous cheer. He sent a message instead. "Evenings belong to my daughter." He expected to be punished by lightning. Nothing smote him. The pasta cooled. Harper fed a noodle to Bunny and declared him a terrible eater. Elliot laughed with his whole chest. Later, Harper drew 3 triangles with touching corners and a lemon overhead shaped like a sun. She wrote very slowly, pressing too hard. "We live here." The letters came out like stakes. Alina put the drawing on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a fish. Elliot stood in front of it a long while, reading it as if it were a merger document that required his signature and behavior, not ink. Night rearranged the house's edges into something softer. The philodendron raised its leaves, satisfied. The lemon tree held its small green beads like secrets it would one day tell. In the quiet, Elliot heard something like a promise, but smaller, more honest. The noise of a home under construction by people who meant it. He lay in bed and didn't reach for the glowing world beside him. In the guest room, Alina exhaled the long exhale of someone who has not left. Down the hall, a child slept with her palm open, as if ready to receive without clenching. Morning would test them again. Work would ask first. The phone would light. The city would tempt speed. But on the refrigerator, eye level to a small person who remembered airports too well, the anchors waited. Pancakes, walk, story, quiet. Underneath, in a child's hard-pressed hand, the ordinary credo they were learning to keep. We live here. The week leaned toward velocity again, as if the city itself had nudged the house and said, pick up the pace. Emails arrived with their old authority, calls stacked, a calendar tried to reseed itself in the soil they'd just turned. The anchors on the fridge, pancakes, walk, story, quiet, held their ground in a child's handwriting, but Elliot's days began to slide past them like water around stones. At breakfast, he stood with a spatula in one hand and his phone in the other, the screen throwing its thin blue onto butter. He flipped on muscle memory, missed the edge, burned one side, and laughed too loudly to sell the mistake. Harper watched the phone, not him. Alina slid the pan off the heat and said nothing. Yet, because sometimes naming a drift too early makes it worse. 2 bites and I'll be back by lunch, Elliot promised, swallowing, already halfway out of the kitchen. You can promise pancakes, Alina said softly. Don't promise time you haven't wrestled for yet. He nodded, chastened, kissed Harper's hair. Left. The front door closed with the finality of a court stamp. The house adjusted to the old echo. Harper pressed her fork into the pancake's softened face, lifted a triangle and set it down again. Later? She asked, an attempt at the new grammar. Later we'll draw the lemon tree, Alina replied. Right now we eat. They practiced boring. Harper's triangle disappeared. They watered the sapling. It held its green beads like promises. On the drive to music class, Harper hummed not quite songs and counted buses. In the community center's bright room, she tapped the triangle on the downbeat again and again until it sounded like confidence. After class, she asked, Is Daddy working? In the tone of a meteorologist making small talk with a storm. Yes, Alina said. He's learning how to put a fence around work. Fences keep things in, Harper observed. And keep other things safe, Alina countered. By late afternoon, the house had collected the day's small evidences. A smear of crayon on the island, a damp towel over a chair, a line of shoes that looked like punctuation. The door opened at 6:40. Elliot stepped in with apology in the set of his shoulders and the damp of a fog colder than weather. I'm late. We noticed, Alina said, calm, almost kind. Show us tomorrow. At dinner, Harper pushed noodles around her plate without choosing a destination. Elliot told a story about a VP who had confused urgency with importance. He told it funnier than it had felt. Alina listened with her eyes, then asked, Where were you at 6:15? In a conference room, he admitted. The alarm went off. I turned it off. I told myself it was 5 minutes. Alina set down her chopsticks. 5 minutes or doorstops. Leave enough of them and the door never closes. She wasn't angry. She was asking him to check his math. After dishes, after bath, after the 3 brushes and the does that feel okay? Alina found Elliot on the patio staring at the bay, his jaw arguing with itself. I'm learning, he said before she could speak. I see you trying, she answered. But trying is a verb the world will always applaud because it requires nothing of them. Pick a thing you will defend. What thing? The word came out tired. He wished it didn't. 6:22, Alina said. Pick it like a flight you cannot miss. Pick pancakes like a holy day. Pick us not with speeches, Elliot, with a calendar. He breathed in, long enough to meet the length of her sentence. Okay, he said. Show you, not tell you. He went inside, took out his phone, and began to move things. Calls to mornings, standing meetings to other days, an evening briefing to never. He messaged his assistant. Evenings belong to my daughter unless something is bleeding. He didn't wait for pushback. He knew it would come. He let it arrive where it belonged, in someone else's night. The pushback began at 7:03 in the form of a name that still carried old gravity: Charles Whitmore. The phone lit the counter like an altar. Elliot stared at it. Alina looked at him. Neither spoke. The ringtone, polite, insistent, stopped. He did not call back. He set the phone face down as if to show the kitchen who mattered here. "Another test tomorrow," Alina said. "I'll take it in the morning," he replied. It sounded like a plan, not a delay. The next day conspired against him. A deal began to slosh at the edges. Lawyers wanted to make new words for old problems. A board member floated interim leadership realignment in a tone that pretended to be helpful. At 6:11, Elliot stood in a conference room watching the clock like a man counting down to an ejection seat. "We can reconvene at 7, someone said. 8, someone else offered, as if moving the number later made it smaller. "No," Elliot said, surprising himself with the clean weight of the syllable. "We'll pick this up at 7 a.m. I have a commitment." They looked at him as if he'd spoken a dialect, then photographed him with their eyes for a problem they would try to fix later. He left anyway. He opened the door at home at 6:22 and said simply, "I'm here." Alina did not applaud. Harper pointed at the table, already set. The smell of lemon and garlic hung in the air like proof. "We saved you a seat," she said, not dramatic, not accusing, just a ledger entry that had balance tonight. He sat. He did not tell the story of his day until Harper asked. He did not perform presence. He practiced it, fork, questions, listening for the small weather in a child's 3-sentence summary of music class. Later they watered the lemon tree together in the blue hour. Harper tipped the can and whispered, "Drink, drink," like a nurse in miniature. Elliot let his shoes catch the splash and didn't flinch when the water darkened the leather. The backslide came on Thursday, as backslides do, when you start to believe habit belongs to you because you remembered it once. At 5:58, a ping-ping of messages accreted into only 5 minutes, and then into "will be quick." At 6:27, Elliot's key slid into the lock and stuck like an argument. He entered to find the table cleared, the kitchen wiped to the kind of clean that is also a weather report. The Fox book sat shut with a bookmark placed with ceremony, a lemon leaf pressed green. Alina was in the corner chair with Harper asleep against her, breath even, lips parted in the surrender of children who ran out of defense budgets. On the island lay a sheet of paper, thick from the good pad Harper reserved for declarations. Crayon had saturated the fibers. A small house with windows, 3 triangles holding each other's corners beneath a sun that looked like a bright coin. Across the bottom, letters pressed too hard, a child's insistence bending the line. "You are home." Elliot stood over it until the room stopped swaying. Shame wanted to do its old work. Perform penance, escalate apology, buy something. He poured water instead and set a glass where his plate should have been, as if to hydrate whatever had just been planted. Alina blinked awake as he touched the back of the chair. She didn't move. "She waited," Alina said, voice sanded with sleep. "Then she drew. Then she fell asleep like it was safe to. I told them 5 minutes," he confessed. "I know what 5 minutes means," she said. "No heat, only measurement." He nodded at the drawing. "May I put it up?" "Ask her in the morning," Alina said. "Tonight you can sit with it." He did. He sat at the island and let the words work on him until their grammar rewrote his spine. "You are home, not this is home, not we are home." A sentence that assigned him a role instead of a place. He understood suddenly that this was what Alina had been saying in all her quieter ways. That houses are nouns, but home is a verb you practice until the people who need it can rest without bargaining. In the morning, Harper found him at the table before the sun had finished stitching the bay back into the window. "Can we put it on the fridge?" "Yes," he said, "where it's easiest to read." Harper climbed onto a stool and supervised magnet placement with the solemnity of a foreman. The lemonfish magnet claimed the top left corner. "There," she decreed. Elliot stepped back with her and read it aloud, not to teach her letters, but to teach himself a sentence he intended to keep. He picked a fight with his calendar before it could pick one with him. He canceled a weekly dinner that had never been about dinner. He told legal they could either meet at 7 a.m. or send notes. He would read them while flipping pancakes. He sent a message to Charles Whitmore. Let's speak tomorrow at 9 at my office. He did not add about Harper because the word family did not need the armor of argument today. At 9:02, he was at his desk with syrup on his cuff and a spine that felt taller. At 3:15, he slipped out for 20 minutes to stand at the back of the community center and watch a small person with a triangle find downbeats with friends. At 6:15, the alarm chimed. He turned the world down. At 6:22, he walked through the door and caught Alina mid-sentence, reading half a page ahead because Harper liked to pretend she didn't already know how the bird found its sky. They ate. They argued gently about whether the lemon tree liked jazz. They fixed the pantry hinge together. Elliot took the trash out and came back without thinking it was noble. Ordinary logistics, the choreography of staying, made the rooms hum differently. The matte syrup circle on the marble refused to disappear. He felt grateful for its insistence. Later, the phone lit the counter again with Charles Whitmore. Elliot let it go to voicemail and then listened to it in the bedroom, away from small ears. We need to talk about stability, Charles said, which was how men like him pronounce control. Elliot returned to the kitchen, set the phone down face up this time, and told Alina, tomorrow. Not as a dodge, as an anchor. She nodded at the fridge. He'll bring weather, she said, meaning Charles, meaning the old life. We have a barometer, he answered, touching the drawing's edge. Harper's letters stared back, indelicate, ardent. You are home. They stood a moment longer, listening to the house breathe. In Harper's room, the bunny faced the wall for privacy. The child slept with one hand open as if catching air. On the patio, the lemon sapling shook off a small breeze and kept its tiny fruit. In the corner, the plant tilted toward the window, and the window obliged. The test wasn't a final, it was ongoing. Conjugated daily in pancakes and pauses, in goodbyes handled honestly, and hellos kept small. But the proof had a place now at eye level, where a man who had once measured life by departures could relearn it by arrivals, and where a child could point, if the world tried to argue, and remind him what he had become. Charles arrived with weather in his coat. Even in California sun, he carried November, shoulders squared against a wind only he could feel, voice set to the pitch of men who never learned to ask. Elliot met him at the office at 9 sharp, as promised, with syrup invisible at the cuff because some proofs don't fade quickly and shouldn't. He didn't offer coffee. He offered a chair. We need to talk about stability, Charles began, gaze pinning Elliot to the leather, as if this were a boardroom he still owned. We are, Elliot said. Talking? Stability is why I asked you here instead of at my house. Your house, Charles repeated, tasting the pronoun. And who lives there now besides my granddaughter? My daughter, Elliot corrected, quietly enough to make the correction feel like grammar instead of war. And me. And, he let the word arrive level, unadorned. Alina. Charles's mouth tightened. The flight attendant. The person who helped Harper find her voice again, Elliot said. Titles aren't the same as roles. Charles set a folder on the table and touched it with 2 fingers. It might as well have been a gavel. Claire wanted certain standards for her child. I'm here to make sure you remember that. I remember Claire, Elliot said. He said her name like a key turned in a lock without forcing it. She wanted laughter. She wanted pancakes on Saturdays and messy art and music on weeknights. She wanted a life that made room to be a person. He leaned in. That is the standard I'm holding. By introducing strangers into her home? Charles asked. By introducing care, Elliot countered, and by choosing 622 every night instead of being a ghost with good numbers. This is sentimentality. It's strategy, Elliot said, for keeping a child whole. They looked at each other the way mountains look at oceans, different definitions of depth. Charles opened the folder and slid a glossy photo across the table. Harper at 3, cheeks apples, eyes certainty. A lawyer's letter lay beneath it, couched in language about best interests and continuity. It was an old play, paper to pretend at love. You can take me to court, Elliot said not unkindly. You will lose. Not because I have more money. Because I have receipts the court values more. Time, routine, school enrollment forms with my handwriting. Neighbors who know my face at 622. He softened his tone to the man who had once poured him a drink at his wedding and called him son. You are welcome in Harper's life. We will not allow you to use her as leverage to keep Claire from being gone." Charles studied him as if waiting for a flinch that did not arrive. Then unexpectedly, he sighed. The sound had age in it and something human. "You have changed," he said, almost curious. "I have," Elliot said, and let the admission hang as its own weather. "Will she keep flying?" Charles asked, meaning Alina, meaning the world he didn't understand. "Yes," Elliot said. "Not away from us. From us." "That sounds like instability." "It's rhythm," Elliot replied. "Departures and returns you can set your watch to." He thought of the alarm at 6:15, of the lemon sapling, of a small note on a fridge that held the house together better than any beam. "It's how our home breathes." Charles replaced the photo and closed the folder. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he finally stood, he didn't offer a handshake or a threat. He adjusted his cuff and said, almost to himself, "Claire liked peonies." "So do we," Elliot said. "We planted a lemon, too." Charles nodded once, barely, and left. When the door clicked, it did not slam. It sealed. Elliot felt no victory. He felt the familiar ache of winning something that still costs. He texted Alina. "All right here. Dinner at 6:22? She responded with a lemon emoji and a small triangle that meant we in Harper's new geometry. At home, the day unfurled like a small parade. Pancakes in the morning, because the day had asked for them. School forms in the afternoon, because bureaucracy is one of the languages of belonging. Harper drew a new picture. 3 triangles touching corners, and behind them, a faint 4th triangle with a halo scribbled in gold. She taped it beside, "You are home," and patted the paper as if ensuring the words didn't slide off. "Can we pick flower?" she asked. "From where?" Alina asked. "From the lemon tree," Harper said, scandalizing herself into a giggle. "Joking." "We can pick some for it," Elliot said, remembering the bracelet under the roots. "So it has company." The backyard in late light smelled like someone had opened a window into a memory. The sapling held its tiny fruit like green intentions. They tucked store-bought flowers at the base, cheap daisies that did the job of joy better than roses. Harper whispered, "For Mommy," and pressed the soil down with her small palm. Alina whispered something in her grandmother's language that meant stay and grow, and we will be boring on purpose. "What if we got married here?" Harper said later, as if the idea were obvious, and they had just been slow to recognize it. Elliot looked at Alina. Neither of them laughed. Neither of them panicked. The word married slid into the air and did not cause the walls to flinch. "Maybe we should," Alina said, surprising herself because her body did not tense at the door the way it once would have. "Nothing big," Elliot said. "No speeches, no parade, just witnesses, a tree that owes us fruit, a fridge that knows our names, a girl who runs the show." "Who would bring the rings?" Harper asked. "You would," Alina said, "and you'd tell us when to breathe." They chose a day like they chose pancakes, by feeling, not by a calendar that had forfeited the right to rule. The judge came at dusk, an old friend who owed Elliot 3 favors and collected on none of them. The ceremony lasted the length of a song hummed under breath. Harper wore a white dress that still had a tag turned inward because Alina had forgotten scissors. Harper called it confetti and refused to let them fix it. The lemon tree stood straighter than usual, as if permitted pride. The bay held its breath long enough to hear the vows. "I don't have the speeches I used to keep in my pocket," Elliot said, taking Alina's hands. "Just this. You taught me that love is not a promise you make once, but a practice you keep. I'll keep it. At 6:22 and at 6:23 and at 2 a.m. if the monsters get ideas." Alina's smile trembled, then steadied. "And I'll keep reminding you that soft isn't collapse," she said. "It's the structure under everything that lasts. I'll practice that, even when my hands remember how to pack." Harper held out 2 simple bands. Silver, nothing that would distract from hands. "Match," she declared. They slipped them on. The judge said the legal words with the unearned tenderness of someone who had watched this family become itself and felt lucky to witness the rehearsal and the show. After, they ate noodles at the window because the kitchen asked to be part of it and because noble dinners are for films, not lives. They danced badly in the living room, Alina barefoot, Elliot learning to be, Harper spinning in circles until she collapsed into giggles. The lemon tree kept its counsel. The philodendron approved with leaves. When Harper fell asleep on the couch, Alina carried her upstairs. Elliot followed with the bunny and a glass of water because small logistics are love's ballast. In the doorway, Alina paused and looked back at him over her shoulder, the kind of glance that used to be a prelude to goodbye. Tonight it was a snapshot of here. "Do you miss flying?" he asked when they were back on the patio, the bay riding its small light across the water. "I still fly," she said, teasing him out of worry. Then quieter. "Sometimes I miss the certainty of departure. It's easier to measure than staying." "We can measure staying," he said, "in pancakes and triangles and the number of times we say Claire's name without breaking." He tilted his head to the sky. A distant plane stitched a thread across blue turning indigo. "We can still look up." "We will," she said, "and then we'll look down at our feet and be relieved they're on this ground." Her next flight came a month later, scheduled and agreed upon, like weather you welcome because you arranged it. Harper made a chart with boxes to color. Takeoff, cloud, snack, landing, hug. Alina packed without emergency. The suitcase zipper didn't sound like a threat. At the door, Harper looped the bunny's ear around Alina's wrist like a charm. "You come back to here," she instructed, tapping the mat. "Not another here." "Only this here," Alina promised. Elliot drove her to the airport and did not pretend not to hate the terminal. They hugged like people who had stopped apologizing for how much. "I'll take the call with Charles if he calls again," Elliot said. "I'll say yes to the parts that are love and no to the parts that are control." "That sounds like a rehearsal," she said, approving. She boarded. He watched the plane back out, a bright punctuation on the runway's sentence. He drove home without filling the ride with calls. Harper met him on the porch with a crayon smudge above her eyebrow and announced, "We saved you a seat," because rituals keep their power when you keep them doing small jobs. Alina texted a photo in the galley, a triangle drawn on a napkin, a lemon emoji, the caption, "On my way back whenever the sky allows." Harper colored in the cloud box. Elliot flipped pancakes the next morning because practice does not pause for sentiment. When Alina returned 2 days later, Harper ran the last 10 steps and stopped within Alina's knees like a plane hitting a gate gently. They walked home. The house opened the way it had learned, not shelving them as guests, not asking them to behave. The drawing on the fridge had curled at the edges. Elliot smoothed it with 2 fingers as if it were a collar before a photo. Your home met them at eye level. It felt less like a claim now and more like a description. That night, they stood under the lemon tree and found the first yellow fruit full and warm. Harper picked it and held it like an egg. "Proof," she said. "Of what?" Alina asked, though she knew. "That the tree likes us," Harper said. "That it wanted to stay." They didn't make a ceremony of slicing it. They cut the lemon and laughed when it dripped. They added it to water and pretended the fancy versions of their lives had invented the recipe. In the quiet after, Elliot took Alina's hand and did not narrate what it meant. He didn't need to. The house translated. Above them, a plane crossed the night. They looked up because they promised they would, and then they looked back at each other because promise is a practice. A breeze moved through the leaves and the little tree didn't sway much at all. It had made up its mind.